Now, the blue zones are something we often refer to on this podcast, so we are really pleased to welcome Dan Buettner, the National Geographic explorer and author who discovered these special places which serve as examples of people living the longest and healthiest lives. And whilst everyone can read the insight on this subject in his writing and reporting, he has also founded a Blue Zones company that works in partnership with US city governments, hospital systems, and insurers to implement the Blue Zones knowledge to help make cities healthier. Then, on an everyday practical note for longevity through food, he's just released a book, Blue Zones Kitchen, One Pot Meals, 100 Recipes to Live to 100, and has recently launched a podcast all about how to live long and healthy lives. So welcome to The Nutshell, Dan.
Well, in a nutshell, it's a delight to be here.
Great. Can you actually start by telling us more about you? And what we want to know is, have you personally always been quite healthy? And more about when you would say that you noticed the potential impact of our environments on our health.
I've always been quite healthy. I started my career out of college by setting 3 world records for biking across Africa, Alaska to Argentina, and around the world. So that required a certain level of fitness. When I started the Blue Zone work 25 years ago, I got very interested in diet, what people who actually make it to 100, what they've eaten over the course of their lives. Because if you want to know what a centenarian ate to live to 100, you have to know what she was eating as a little girl and middle age and newly retired and lately. You can't just ask them what they had for breakfast, which a lot of journalists do. So we did a thorough meta-analysis. When you marinate in populations who've actually achieved the outcomes we want, which is to say people who've made it into their 90s or hundreds. I'm not saying 120 here, but I am saying mid-90s or almost 100, which is achievable by most of our bodies. There's a very clear pattern. And it shows up in Asia, it shows up in Europe, it shows up in Latin America, and it shows up in the United States. The same dietary trends are identical in every place where people actually make it to mid-90s without chronic disease. My work at Blue Zone sought to identify with scientific precision where people are manifestly living the longest without chronic disease, and then reverse engineer it. Yeah, so I focus on what populations actually did over time to produce longevity, and that's mostly what I discuss.
So Dan, that was going to be my next question actually, which you've sort of hinted at. But I mean, our regular listeners are really interested in lifestyle and nutrition. But for our new listeners who perhaps haven't heard of your work, can you just give us an overview of what the Blue Zones are and how you came to identify them? Particularly, we'd like to know what they have in common, culturally, socially, and obviously environmentally.
For most of my working career, I've been an explorer for National Geographic and others. And I got very good at solving scientific mysteries. Why the Maya civilization collapsed, human origins. The Danish twin studies found that only about 20% of how long we live is dictated by genes. The other 80% is explained by something else. And I reasoned that if I could find areas where people are living statistically longest, that 80% of the reason lies in their environment or perhaps their lifestyle, whatever that means. But I started with a grant from the National Institutes on Aging here in the United States to hire demographers to look through worldwide population data and look for places where people are reaching age 90 at the highest rate. For us, longevity begins at age 90. We call them nonagenarians, not just centenarians. And we found about 10 areas in the world where people seem to be living a long time. But then the next step disqualifies a lot of places. We looked at the Vilcabamba Valley of Ecuador and the Caucasus in Soviet Georgia and the Hunza Valley and a place in China. And all those places lacked birth certificates and death certificates, so we couldn't confirm those places. Ultimately, the 5 blue zones we confirmed, we were able to do because we looked at birth records and cross-check them with baptismal records to make sure people were born when when their documents say they are, and then death records. And we found the longest lived women in the world in Okinawa, Japan, the longest lived men in the highlands of Sardinia. On the island of Ikaria, Greece, we found a population pretty much devoid of dementia, live about 8 years longer than Americans. In the Nicoya Peninsula of Costa Rica, you see the lowest rate of middle-age mortality in the world. And that means people are reaching mid-90s at the highest rate in the world, probably 3 times that of the United States. And then among the Seventh-day Adventists, an American population living about 8 years longer than their California counterparts. And we dubbed those, or I guess I dubbed them blue zones. And then went about looking for the common denominators. The way you do that is you look in the academic literature for correlations. So what's happening in these places when it comes to how they live and how they eat and how they move that seems to line up with their longevity. I found 9 factors, but I'll share with you the 4 general categories. First of all, people in blue zones don't exercise. And people say, well, wait a minute, I thought you need to exercise to be healthy. People in blue zones get the equivalent of 12,000 steps a day, but not by willfully planning it, putting it in their Outlook calendar, whatever. They live in environments that nudge them into moving every 20 minutes or so. So every time they go to work or a friend's house or out to eat, it occasions a walk. They have gardens out back. So 3 or sometimes even 4 seasons a year, they're out hoeing and weeding and watering and harvesting the plants that they're growing. Their houses aren't full of mechanical conveniences. They're doing yard work by hand and kitchen work by hand. And all this adds up. All this non-exercise physical activity adds up to not only burning more calories than you'd burn in a half hour or an hour at the gym, but it keeps your metabolism rates up higher. People in the blue zones have strong social circles, support circles that not only help people get through tough times, but more importantly, help influence them to do the right things on a daily basis, eat the right way, move together, shed stress together. They all tend to belong to a religion. The religion varies, but the point is they show up. They belong to a faith-based community, and they show up once a week. And they're less likely to engage in risky behaviors. They have a built-in social network. They have usually a day a week where they downshift, take the focus off of their busy life. And then it's the diet. And we find beyond a shadow of a doubt, the vast majority of the calories they consume are from whole plant-based sources. I go into length on exactly what they eat in this Blue Zone Kitchen one pot. But it's very clear that the calories of longevity are complex carbohydrates, not protein, not fat. Protein and fat are important, but when you break them down to their sort of macronutrients, complex carbohydrates are the ones that are under-celebrated in the standard American diet.
Fascinating. And what was really, I found, remarkable about the blue zones is not just the long life, but the long healthy life, the health span that we talk about. It's so important. And we'd love to speak more about nutrition, but can I circle back first and ask you a little bit about social connection? You mentioned community, and obviously we know there's studies about the importance of social connection and even emphasis on how loneliness can be comparable to smoking when it comes to poor health outcomes. But what do you say to those who are perhaps more introverted and enjoy their own company more than socializing? Would they still benefit from the company of others? And I'm asking this for a friend, by the way.
So, I wrote a cover story for National Geographic on happiness that went into the sort of statistical underpinnings of happiness. So I remember this from the research that actually both introverts and extroverts are happier when they're with people. They're just not as happy and not as long as extroverts. So introverts for small periods actually get happier. It's a mistake to think that introverts just want to be by themselves all the time. They don't. They just don't want to be the focus of a party, and they wear out sooner. Humans are species that evolve cooperating with other humans. If you take two 5-year-old chimpanzees and a bucket of water that weighs too much for any one of them to carry, it will never occur to the two chimpanzees to each grab one end of the handle and carry it together. There's a famous study done that showed that 5-year-old humans will figure out each of them will grab one end of the bucket, and they'll cooperate and carry it together. We are a species that have grown to need and to enjoy the company of others. And without it, it's very clear that it reduces our life expectancy.
Yeah. As sort of practicing clinicians here in the UK, we worry a lot about loneliness, particularly in the elderly in our populations. Can you give us some real world examples of initiatives you've seen to combat loneliness, particularly in that age group?
My daytime job involves helping cities lower the cost of disease, essentially raising their life expectancy. We have a very successful program called MOIs, where we invite older people to a big room and we circle them up. We ask them a series of 20 questions to get them revealing what their values and their interests are. And then we ask them to look at each other as they're answering these questions. And at the end, we invite them to circle up into groups of 5. And then we help organize them to walk together or eat Blue Zone's food together for about 10 weeks. And we find this is remarkably effective at getting people to connect. It's sort of like putting training wheels on, especially now with so many of us on social media. We've lost the skill of social connection, of meeting a stranger or of hosting a happy hour. And we find that if we could just facilitate the first half a dozen or so meetings, you can take the training wheels off and people will organize themselves and connect. And that's worked very well. We call it a MOI, MOAI. It's inspired by an Okinawan construct.
Wow, yeah, that's amazing. It reminds me a bit of Walk with the Doc, Claire. Do you remember there's an initiative, I think it's global now, where people go on a walking group with a doctor who sets it up. And like you say, those social connections form naturally and people...
Tell us about Walk with the Doc.
Yeah, it's a global initiative, and if a doctor's interested, they set it up in their community. I went to visit one actually up near Birmingham, and they had sort of about 20 people walking and making those social connections, meeting up outside of that group as well. So yeah, there's a lot of these sort of local initiatives, I think.
And the idea is you get to ask the doctor questions as you're walking with them, or?
Not necessarily. I mean, you can do, but the doctors that I saw actually gave a mini lecture at the end about lifestyle and health and nutrition. So not individual medical advice, but general medical, general sort of lifestyle advice. Yeah, absolutely.
In one of our Blue Zone project cities, Fort Worth, Texas, the mayor there, the wonderful Betsy Price, twice a week, she had what she called rolling town hall meetings. She would get dressed up in colorful Lycra, get on her bicycle, and anybody in town, this is a city of 1 million people, anybody wanted to meet the mayor, all they had to do was get on a bike. And she would bike around different parts of the city, and you could have a conversation with her, but you had to be on a bike. I love that.
Yeah, a moving meeting. I love that. Brilliant.
I realise, Dan, that it's your day job and you normally charge a lot of money for this kind of advice. But what I'm interested in is this idea that if someone can't move to a blue zone, can they work to create a blue zone? Because I notice, particularly where I live, it's really hilly. It's really beautiful to go outside and you can do things like you can swim in the sea, but there's still an awful lot of unhealthy people walking around. So I've often wondered where we could start.
I think the first thing is to realize that trying to change your habit will probably fail. Getting on diets or exercise programs or supplement schemes fail for almost all people, almost all the time in the long run. They're great business plans because you can get people doing them over and over again, New Year's resolutions and so forth. But what actually seems to work is shaping your environment. So you set up nudges that govern your unconscious decisions. And a few things work, starting with your immediate social circle. We know if your 3 best friends are obese and unhealthy, there's a 150% better chance that you'll be overweight yourself. Human behaviors are measurably contagious. So while I wouldn't necessarily tell you to dump your unhealthy friends, I will tell you that one of the best strategies is to proactively bring into your immediate social circle at least 3 friends whose idea of recreation is walking or gardening or pickleball or some active sport. Number 2, of friends who care about you on a bad day. That's the litmus test for a true friend. There's we all know the people who are not authentic with you, and you can actually feel lonelier being with those people than you could feel when you're all by yourself. And then it's not a bad idea to have a vegan or vegetarian in your immediate social circle, because they're going to teach you how to make delicious plant-based food, or at least how to find it. I've written a #1 New York Times best-selling book on longevity, and I can tell you the most important ingredient in any longevity recipe, it's not tofu, it's not kale, it's not turmeric, it's taste. The food's got to taste good, or people don't eat it for long enough to make a difference. So, our vegan and vegetarian friends are going to show us where to find that. So that's #1. Number 2, there's actually a very good study done in London that showed that people who take public transportation to work as opposed to driving have about 20% lower rates of cardiovascular mortality. So figuring out how you can take the bus or the tube or your bicycle to work, right there will lower your chance of dying prematurely by a measurable amount. So I would call that blue zoning your commute. And then also, I believe that most of us are on what I call a seafood diet. We eat the food we see. And if there is a bag of crisps on our counter with a clip on it, every time we walk by, we're going to see that bag and we're going to be tempted to eat it or dig our hand in there. And most of the time we will. So having a junk food drawer, most of us are going to have junk food in our kitchen. I have junk food in my kitchen, but it's hidden. It's out of sight. It's in an inconvenient place. So there's 2 hurdles to me actually grabbing it. Moreover, what's sitting out, I could show you around the corner here, what's sitting right up on top, the most prominent spot of my kitchen is a big, beautiful fruit bowl, which right now has peaches, avocados, and fresh tomatoes that I just picked from my garden. So when I walk through my kitchen, which I do about 25 times a day, I'm a little hungry. I'm reaching for the fruit, not the Doritos. So those are 3 ideas right there.
Brilliant. And it's so good to hear that somebody is actually doing something to promote the popularity of that vegan friend, because as vegans, we're not always in demand, but hearing that we might be able to lead the way there is really heartening.
I vote for a program called Rent a Vegan, the secret to longevity and happier. I'll be your agent.
You're on. Just thinking about, I know we're touching on what governments might be able to do in terms of, changing how a city is working. But in the UK, we struggle a lot with the public perception that the government is there to protect us from harms, but at the same time, we don't like being told what to do. Are there any sort of one-size-fits-all government actions that particularly stand out that work across different cultures, do you think?
Well, banning billboards. We know is that what you guys call them in the UK? Billboards? Big advertisements you see on like the roadside or side of buildings. Do you have those?
I totally recognize the name billboard, but I'm not sure because it was that there was a film that had it in the title, wasn't there? But yeah, advertisement board. I know what you mean. I think we know what you mean.
Yeah, we have them on the tube mainly, on the London Underground.
Yeah.
Okay. So in the United States, they're all over the place, and they almost always are there selling us McDonald's or Coca-Cola or Doritos or junk food. And there's been a couple studies that show that if you have two identical neighborhoods, one with billboard advertising and one without, that the neighborhood without has lower BMI by about 15%. It's usually a pretty easy sell because nobody misses those billboards or advertisements other than, the advertiser. So that's usually a pretty easy sell. That's the kind of thing we do. Walkability, for example. People think they want maximum ability to drive fast, but they don't want that in their neighborhood. And so if you ask neighbors, they want the nice sidewalks, the trees, the bike lanes, the wide sidewalks, the slow speed limits. If you can show people one vision for their neighborhood where they have a highway ripping through it and cars speeding by at 100 kilometers an hour, you get one level of interest. And if you could show them the walkable version of it, that's usually a pretty easy sell. And by just making a city walkable or bikeable, you raise the physical activity level by about 20%. We're kind of marketed all the time, this idea that we get our exercise in the gym, but we don't. If you look at data, actually people don't go to the gym as much as they think they do, and they certainly don't go there enough to make up for the calories they're eating. It's much more effective to build an environment where people are mindlessly moving, and that's done by a walkable city. But the overarching strategy, we've come up with what we call policy menus. And on that policy menu, there'll be 25 or 30 ways to favor healthy food over junk food and junk food marketing. One of them might be taxing soda pops, or another one might be eliminating drive-throughs at fast food restaurants. That lowers, or diminishing the size of junk food signs. All of these are evidence-based ways of lowering consumption. And you don't want to railroad any one thing down a city's throat. You simply say, in our case, we'll offer you Blue Zone certification, but you have to pass 8 policies of your choice. And we'll help you evaluate each of them for effectiveness and feasibility. But once we identify them, then we'll put somebody from our staff to work with your city council or city government to get these ideas passed and implemented. And that way you kind of sidestep the nanny state label, because we're simply giving them the evidence, finding consensus, and then doing what they want to do rather than what we tell them.
And just what sort of number of cities have you got vying for Blue Zone certification at the moment?
Well, it's more than certification. It's a solution. We come into cities for 5 years, and we work with the entire city, and we get paid when we lower the obesity rate of the city. When you lower the obesity rate of the city by, say, 1% in a population of 1 million, you avoid about 19,000 heart attacks and about 7,000 cases of type 2 diabetes. And that saves a lot of money. We've worked in 70 American cities. Currently, the biggest cities we're working in are Phoenix, Arizona, Tucson, Fort Worth, Jacksonville, Florida, Naples, Florida, and then Palm Desert. It's called Riverside in California. And we just added Galveston, Texas this week, in fact. There's probably 100 cities that want to do it. Unfortunately, we have a healthcare system in America that waits for you to get sick and then pays to help get you better. There's currently no good economics in getting paid to keep people healthy in the first place. And that's our business. So we have to work a lot harder to find funding for our work than the Ozempic industry. I will, just before we move on, King Charles invited me to, not Buckingham, what's the other big palace he has?
Windsor Castle?
Yeah. And I actually met him for 45 minutes. We talked about doing a Blue Zone in the UK. And he's a guy, shockingly, very well educated and on fire, actually, to make UK healthier to the extent that he can. So, kind of a kudos to your to your sovereign there. Moving on to diet. So I wrote a book called The Blue Zone Solution a few years ago, and where I did what's called a meta-analysis of 155 dietary surveys done in all 5 blue zones over the past 100 years. So once again, if you want to know what a centenarian ate to live to be 100, you have to know what she was eating her entire life. And to get at that, these dietary surveys, let's say done in the 1930s, we can see pretty clearly what Sardinians were eating in the 1930s. They're done almost every decade. And when you average them out, it's very clear that 90+% of all the calories they're taking in are from whole plant-based sources. They do eat meat, but in America here, we eat about 240 pounds of meat a year per person. That's a bathtub full of dead animal. There is no question that's associated with higher rates of cardiovascular disease, type 2 diabetes, dementia, heart disease, et cetera, et cetera. That doesn't even begin to talk about the environmental ramifications or the animal cruelty ramifications. People in blue zones were eating about 20 pounds or 10 kilos of meat per year. So about a 10th or 11th of what Americans eat. And some are vegan. Not all, not even the majority, but they're very low meat populations. And meat was mostly a celebratory food, consumed during a wedding or a birthday or after church on Sunday or something. Most of their day-to-day food was peasant food. The 5 general ingredients of all longevity diets in the world are whole grains. Depending on where you are, it's either wheat, rice, or corn. It's greens. Icaria, for example, has at least 80 types of greens that grow wild that are fantastically rich in polyphenols, fiber, arguably the healthiest food there is, and it's free. Tubers, like sweet potatoes. In Okinawa, about 70% of their dietary intake until 1980 or so came from purple sweet potatoes. They ate them all the time, and they're also fantastically delicious. When people snack, it's usually nuts in blue zones. And then the cornerstone of every longevity diet in the world is beans. And if you're eating a cup of beans a day, it's probably worth 4 extra years of life expectancy. So those are kind of the dietary highlights of blue zones.
Yeah, lovely. The sorts of foods we always talk about on this podcast. And how did you incorporate this advice into your new book? Can you tell us a bit more about your book?
Thank you. It's called The Blue Zone Kitchen One-Pot Meals. And, I'm a science journalist, and a long time ago, I realized that unless you can translate science into something people can use, what's the point? And my book, The Blue Zone Kitchen, turned out to be a #1 New York Times bestseller, #1 Wall Street bestseller. But, some of those recipes were involved, and I realized that Americans perceive they're busy. #1. #2, a lot of Americans can't afford expensive ingredients. #3, people perceive that recipes are hard. And finally, people are afraid that their plant-based food isn't going to taste good. So I overcame every one of those objections. First of all, every one of these recipes can be made in one pot, and most of them in an Instapot. You throw the ingredients in there, you hit the button. #2, they're all from blue zones. They're all 100% whole food, plant-based. All the ingredients, all the recipes are inspired by what people in the longest lived areas actually eat. #3, most of the recipes cost less than about £2 per serving. I'm translating roughly. Most of the recipes take less than 20 minutes to assemble. So, no matter how busy you are, it's a lot cheaper to spend 20 minutes at home than it is to drive to your fast food restaurant and order and wait for it there. And then finally, to make sure these were delicious, I worked with Stanford University. We scraped 650,000 recipes from the most popular sites. We isolated all the recipes with with 100 or more 5-star reviews. So the most popular recipes. And then we analyzed them and we distilled out 7 flavor profiles. And the vast majority of the recipes in Blue Zone Kitchen One Pot follow those 7 profiles that we know Americans love. One of them, for example, is curry. Americans love curry. We love Tex-Mex here.
Who doesn't?
We look at, remember when you're a kid, you can, if you got a glimpse of what the key or the master copy of what the teacher had of the test, here we kind of cheat and find out ahead of time what we know Americans are going to love and then build the recipe accordingly.
No, it's brilliant. It's a great book. Your people sent us a PDF, and I've it looks the recipes. I've tried a couple already. They're brilliant. So we'll put a link in the show notes because it will already be out by the time this podcast is out. I think by about a day, so listeners can get their hands on that.
Yeah, I know we sell it in the UK as well. So I know I've been saying Americans, but I just mean busy people.
Absolutely, yeah, we love that.
We've got to ask you, cards on the table. We would never promote alcohol, and we would tell all our patients there is no safe limit of alcohol, except perhaps if you're putting some red wine in a spaghetti bolognese. And that's because we think so many people are at risk of excessive alcohol in an environment where alcohol is prevalent. So what do you say about alcohol?
Well, if you're drinking alcohol right now or you have a problem or you're drinking too much, I'd encourage you to curb that. And if you're not drinking at all, I'm certainly not recommending that you start drinking. I will, however, say it's very hard to separate the Mediterranean diet from red wine because the two have occurred in concert for at least 4,000 years. In all of the Mediterranean blue zones, at least 90% of people who are making it past 90 drink almost every day. So it is part of their diet. And it's become, it's just like pancakes back in the 80s. Everybody's maligning alcohol right now. The epidemiology studies usually lump a rum and Coke, a Cosmopolitan, a beer, and red wine in the same category when they're asking people the question about, these questionnaires that get at their lifestyle and enough facets of their lifestyle that they can find the correlations over time. In blue zones, they're drinking homemade red wine. That's the beverage they're drinking. They're drinking it every day. It's part of their quality of life. There's some evidence that shows that people who are drinking red wine with a plant-based meal about quadruple the absorption of the flavonoids. And the National Academies of Science here in the United States, although they acknowledge drinking even moderate amounts of alcohol can raise your chances of certain cancers, its effect on overall mortality actually drops your overall. In other words, light to moderate drinkers actually have lower rates of overall mortality or higher life expectancy than people who don't drink at all. So, it's one of those things. You can cut the science to support just about any point of view. But my experience in the blue zone is it's definitely part of the blue zone diet, and it's part of their quality of life and their tradition. And that's my position.
So we've just got a couple of more questions before we wrap things up with you, Dan. Can we just ask you if you had some advice to people who are perhaps in their 20s or 30s, who want to age well, who are thinking about their future, but just feel really overwhelmed by the conflicting advice that they're seeing online or in social media?
Well, I know this is self-serving, but you should read the blue zones because these are practices that have been in place for hundreds of years. This is not some newfangled, South Beach scientist or doctor telling you what he found in his test tube. This is, I will say, some time-honored advice is find a good partner, a healthy partner in life, and commit. We know that people in a committed relationship live significantly longer than people who are single or divorced, and having the right partner in life makes a huge difference. I will say one of the biggest things you can do to live longer is move to a healthier neighborhood. When you're starting off life, you have lots of choices where you decide to live. And choosing a neighborhood or small city that's walkable will have a huge impact. We see this in data. You take these suburban-based communities like in Houston and Phoenix, and they only take about 3,000 steps a day. And you compare that to cities like Boulder, Colorado, and Santa Barbara, where people are taking 10,000 steps a day without thinking about it. So choosing carefully where you live is going to have a huge impact. I don't necessarily want to malign individuals and my competitors, so to speak, and their longevity advice. I will tell you that the anti-aging industry has produced exactly zero pills, supplements, or genetic intervention or stem cells which have been shown to reverse, stop, or even slow aging. Right now, if you take any of those drugs, any of these sort of longevity supplements, you're performing a dangerous experiment on your body that has no proof that it's going to do anything to increase your life expectancy. So I don't know if that answers your question. But
Yeah, no, it's great advice. Thank you.
Yeah. And of course, when you start doing your podcast, which I think will be up and running by the time this comes out, then you're going to be bombarded with longevity advice, as I understand it, from experts in the field. So, you're going to have a way of surviving yourself amongst all this, this advice and information that starts floating around and personal decisions about how you live your life.
I have a filter. So it's the Dan Buettner podcast. I hope you'll listen to it. But over the past 20 years of working for National Geographic, I've been afforded the access to the top experts in the world, the real experts on longevity, and they're demographers, they're lifestyle people, they're the things that actually help us live longer are not at all the things that people think of. Most of what we think adds to a long, healthy life is misguided or just plain wrong. For example, changing behaviors or changing habits fails for almost all people all the time. I challenge the two of you. Name one habit that most people, more than 50% of people, can adopt for more than 10 years. There's only one. It's teeth brushing. But all the other ones fail. So we're constantly sold these exercise programs, these diets, these supplement programs, and they have a half-life of about 3 months. And when it comes to longevity, there's nothing you can do this month or this year that will have any bearing at all other than not dying on whether you're alive and healthy in 2030. You have to think about things you're going to do every day for most of your life. In order to achieve that, you can't try to shape your behavior. You have to shape your environment, the people you hang out with, how you set up your home, how you set up your commute, how you set up your kitchen, and how to set up your social life. Those are the things that work in the blue zones. Those are the things that can work for you. And it just requires a complete paradigm shift in the way we think about longevity. All of my guests talk about different ways that we can shape our environment so we will mindlessly make better decisions on a day-to-day basis for the decades necessary to add that 10 or 12 years that we could all be enjoying that we're losing to the grave right now.
Well, we look forward to listening, Dan. It's going to be great, I'm sure. Can I ask you with all the years of experience you've had, though, what is the most surprising thing that you've learned about living a long, healthy life?
That most of what really works is enjoyable. Having good friends. You cited it yourself. Loneliness costs about 8 years off your life expectancy. Rather than spending all the time and money to get on some diet or CrossFit agony that we have to do daily, spending the time to build a really good circle of friends and then having them over for dinner or happy hour or doing something active with. That shit is fun. And we know it adds years. Having a strong sense of purpose and doing meaningful work in life, it adds years to your life. The way you feel when you eat a healthy plant-based meal, as opposed to the way you feel after eating a steak or a hamburger. You eat that steak and hamburger, you feel heavy and tired. And meanwhile, if you eat I make this famous minestrone, I eat it every day for breakfast. And I feel great afterwards. And it sustains me till mid-afternoon when I need my cookie.
Well, it's as if you knew what we were going to ask you next.
Minestrone for breakfast. That's still
Yeah, the secret.
percolating. Yeah.
If you go to my website, danbuettner.com, you can, or it's in the Blue Zone Kitchen One Pot cookbook, but you can download for free the Melis Minestrone. That's a recipe from the longest lived family in the history of the world. They gave me their soup recipe, which they ate every day. So if it was good enough for them, it's good enough for me. And I'll tell you what, starting a day with a savory meal, instead of something sweet or bangers or whatever you guys eat in England,
Beans on toast.
beans on toast. Yeah.
No, we love to end the interview with asking our guests what they're having for dinner, but minestrone for breakfast, I can't do it, Dan. What are you having for dinner?
I have a garden right now, and I've just harvested a bunch of vegetables and bought a bunch more vegetables. And I do a stir fry where I get really kind of spicy red curry paste with coconut milk, and then I just saute the vegetables in that with tofu. I fry tofu, and I love that. That's a weekly ritual around here, and I get 8 or 10 different vegetables in there. It's a Mardi Gras party in a dish.
Very nice.
Not long to wait till dinner now.
No.
And before we let you go, you need to have a listen to what we're having for dinner.
Oh, are we doing? I've already had my dinner. Daisy, I've already eaten.
What did you guys
You've already eaten.
Well, I had, actually nothing that exciting, but I'm sure you'll approve. I had brown rice, a vegetable chili, but with some like soya mince in there as well, and some pinto beans, and a big portion of just blanched kale as well.
Sounds good, Claire.
It was really, I just felt really nourished by it. It was lovely.
And you're very energetic and you're glowing. For those of you who listen, I can tell you she's glowing right now. She's got that kale glow.
Post-kale glow, yeah.
I had to make a recipe out of your book, Dan. I had your Blue Zone burger, which was delicious. Lentil. I didn't have purple sweet potato, which is on your recipe.
It's hard to find.
Sweet potato. And yeah, it was great. I really enjoyed that. I had your Blue Zone burger. So I'd definitely recommend that one if anyone is looking for a recipe from your book to start with.
And for those of you who can't see Daisy, I can tell you that she also has the lentil burger glow right now, which is great.
Definitely. Thank you. Yeah, no, I loved it because you also had this thing where you put mushrooms on either side. So it was like Claire, you have to sort of cut the mushrooms up really, really little and actually put it on the top and the bottom before you fry it. So you've got this like coating of mushroom, which was really nice. Nice flavor.
It sounds really exciting. And I think I might actually be able to use, I was in the charity shop and I bought a burger press. And I'm like, the next time I come to make like a lentil burger or something that has the propensity to fall apart easily, I'm going to get it in that press. So that could be the recipe.
The mushrooms are on there to give it umami. To give it that sort of sixth sense that make things taste rich and yummy. So
yeah, no, it was really delicious. Yeah, I love that.
Thank you for making that, Daisy.
Are you actually having dessert? Is that something that you do?
I don't do it every day, but I find that a piece of chocolate after dinner really goes a long way at satisfying. But I treat myself. I think it's a mistake to try to go through life with these deprivation diets. I can't do it. I think most people can't. They don't have the necessary discipline to do it. So, if I feel like dessert, I eat dessert, and that way, I feel like life is fun. Got something to do once in a while.
I love, I've picked up on this phrase, the half-life of habits that you mentioned earlier, that you said about a habit has a half-life of about 3 months.
Yeah, most of them do. So put some specificity on that. So you start with 100 people on a diet today, you'll keep 90% of them for the first 3 months, but you'll lose 90% of them in 7 months. So there's a really big drop off there. And you'll lose about 96 to 97% of them in 2 years. So in other words, no matter how resolute your friend tells you they're going to stick to this diet now, there's a 98% chance or 96% chance they won't be on it in 2 years. So it does you no good in the longevity. Exercise programs, you start with the 100 people who, at January 1st, I'm going to the gym 3 times a week. By September, you lose 80% of them. So it just, they're good. They're nice ideas. They sell lots of programs and products, but they don't deliver. Blue Zones people don't diet. They don't exercise. They don't do any of the stuff that we do or that we're marketed to live a long time. In Blue Zones, longevity is not something they pursue. It's something that ensues from setting up your surroundings the right way and letting it go from there.
I was just going to conclude by saying that's why, Daisy, the onus on us is to become those vegan buddies.
I'm trying.
keep people going.
The introverts will try her best, Claire.
I still think the Rent a Vegan program has huge potential here.
There we go. We'll look into that for sure.
Well, if anybody has any lingering questions, my Instagram is @Dan and I answer my own direct messages and try to provide ongoing tips there. And it's really been a delight to meet you guys. Thank you for taking the time, and thank you for spreading the word. The world would be a much better place if we could all go plant-based. And you guys are
Absolutely
on the front lines, and I salute you.
100% agree.
Thanks for your time. Thanks for coming on. It was great to chat with you.
All right, you guys.